You're listening to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series,
a dedicated series that explores all things net zero carbon and sustainability within the built environment.
Don't miss any future episodes. Subscribe at placenorthwest.co.uk/subscribe or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series. I'm your host, Julia Hatmaker, and today we're exploring the role bricks can play in sustainability. We aren't stopping building buildings anytime soon, so it's key that if we're going to meet our net zero ambitions, we need to look towards building in a sustainable way. And that means making educated decisions when it comes to the building materials themselves. We've all heard about how good timber is for construction, but not much has been said about brick. And here in Manchester, it seems like brick is definitely king. So that's why we've recruited Stephanie Palmer to join us today. Stephanie is the head of sustainability with Wienerberger UK, a brick manufacturer that supports and enables the construction industry to create a better future for the built environment. The company does this by providing outstanding, sustainable building solutions, long-lasting partnerships, and exceptional enduring careers. Together with their clients, Wienerberger is future building. So, Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Julia. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak to you today.
I am so pumped for this. I've been talking about this with all my friends and family, so they're like, girl, I don't know why you're so into brick. But in chatting with you earlier, in preparation for today, it just, the excitement was real. I was just really into this. So I'm just going to launch right into the podcast. Mm-hmm. How can bricks be the solution to net zero building? Sell me on bricks, Stephanie.
Okay, so before we get into that, let's just dissect that question a little bit because it is a big question, right? So First thing to inspect is the definition of net zero that we're using. So traditionally, or at the moment, government policy has used the progression towards net zero as operational carbon only. So the operational carbon is the carbon released from the energy used during a building's operation, which might be heating or lighting, for example. Whereas actually, if we take the full definition of net zero, at least in the built environment, you'd want to look at the whole life impact of the building. And that's actually where, if we're looking at different materials, there's a lot of detail to get into there. So if we're looking at the whole life cycle costing, we might want to follow a standard like EN 5978, which is currently under review, but that's the standard for assessing the life cycle impact of a building. And at the moment in policy, as I mentioned, the government has focused through the Future Home Standard and the recent updates to Part L, really tackling the operational impact of a building. So they've set targets around the primary energy use and the fabric efficiency, for example, which are all targeting reductions in the operational energy of a building. Through the updates to Part L by the middle of next year, the new design buildings are supposed to deliver a 31% improvement in CO2 emissions versus the current standards today. And that's supposed to be a stepping stone to the Future Home Standard in 2025, where buildings will have an operational carbon efficiency of at least 75% lower than the current building regulations, which is super important. And the targets around the fabric energy efficiency really help achieve that, because if you've got a more airtight building that holds heat better and is regulating the changes in the external environment, be it heat or cold, then you're going to use less energy either heating or cooling the inside of your house. So the fabric efficiency of the building is really important, and that's where the high thermal efficiency of brick can really contribute to reducing the operational energy of the building.
And that makes a lot of sense too. I was going to say, just because we think about, historically when we've been building buildings and people, where it's colder areas have been flocking to brick because it does seem to keep your house warmer. And it's not like, even though we're introducing these new standards and the things we're looking at, wanting to have a warm building that doesn't require much additional heat, that can keep the heat in, isn't new. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting, is you were kind of revisiting things that we've been concerned about for ages. just looking at it from a more sustainable side of things. So I'll let you continue. So obviously the operational part of the building is key when it comes to using the materials.
Yeah, for sure. So the elephant in the room, if you like, which has started to be picked up by commentators in the area, is the upfront emissions, which is the literally the segment of emissions in the building life cycle that contribute to the embodied carbon of the building. So when you are looking at upfront emissions, that's if you're taking the EPD standard, which is EN 15804, that's modules A1 to A4, which is effectively the sourcing of the materials, the production of the construction products. And then the products that you design then lock in the maintenance emissions, the waste disposal emissions later down the line. So that's effectively the embodied carbon that we're talking about when we're choosing materials. So the upfront or embodied carbon is being talked about a lot at the moment in the built environment sector. So there's a movement by a number of institutions, industry-based, to lobby the government for a Part Z, which could make a really good contribution and be complementary to the recent updates to Part L and Part F of the building regulations. However, there is a slight issue with the Part Z as it's currently proposed, because the standard is using the reference service life of 60 years, which if you are investing in a building and you expect it to have a long lifetime, for example, one where it would be great to use brick, then your building fabric is probably going to last more than 60 years. And I'm concerned that if the standard uses the 60-year reference service life, then if a building is made with a structure or fabric that lasts longer than that, then it would be distorted in the standard, or at least the design of the building would be distorted towards construction materials that are around about that 60-year mark, and you wouldn't get any gains for ceramic-based materials like brick that have a service life of 150 years or more.
So there's really is no way of kind of calculating that in the current system they have set up. So you can't see like how good it is past the 60 years. It's just kind of like the cutoff then.
Yeah. So the standard for the environmental product declarations, EN 15804, tends to use that 60-year service life as well. So if you were to look at the embodied carbon of a brick over its lifespan, then you'd be taking the carbon impact from our environmental product declaration through dividing it by 150 years, the reference service life, which would give you a relatively low per year carbon impact. And that's where it really comes into its own with other building materials if you look at the impact over its service life. And if you're constructing domestic buildings, like the ones we currently live in, there's a lot of old Victorian stock. If we'd made those out of different materials, then we'd potentially have a lot more emissions generated from the maintenance or renewal of those buildings, as the materials that they're built from potentially becoming degraded.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me we're not really factoring in a long-lasting solution here. And, if we're looking at these materials, like obviously we want buildings to last as long as possible. At least I think we do. So kind of factoring that in when we're choosing our building material and being like, how long do we want to have this building around for? And then maybe using that to judge the materials and how their performance is when it comes to carbon.
Yes.
And I think I want to go back to a little bit before, because you were talking about embodied carbon, which is, the carbon that kind of goes into creating something. And I know brick has to involve some heat, which is not good when it comes to this kind of thing. So, I mean, how bad is that then when it comes to using brick as a material?
So it's not necessarily the heat that's bad, but the fuel the heat is generated from. So at the moment, we're firing clay at over 1,000 degrees in our long brick kilns to turn them into a ceramic brick product. And through that transition of clay to a ceramic material, you get inbuilt all of the durability, so that really long service life, also the fire rating protection. So there's a good reason to use baked clay as ceramic material for a building product because of the in-use benefits that it offers. But at the moment, we are currently reliant on natural gas and electricity, predominantly natural gas, to create those high temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. So the challenge for us, Wienerberger, and the rest of the ceramic product manufacturers is how will we transition away from that use of natural gas to a lower carbon fuel source, which in turn will reduce the upfront and embodied carbon of our products. And that really is the current dilemma that we are trying to work through. So there's support from the government at a national level through the energy white paper and the recent net zero strategy that's been released. The government is committing to trial local hydrogen networks and inject some small proportion, I think it's up to 20% into the natural gas network at the moment. So there's potential that if Wienerberger is able to adjust its technology and process to accept that mix of natural gas and hydrogen, if the hydrogen is created in a low environmental impact way, so low emission process, then that would help to decarbonize our process and in turn the embodied carbon of our products without major changes to the production process as it looks today. The other option is for ceramic manufacturers to pursue the electrification of the production process, which if we can then use renewable electricity to achieve that, then we would also be able to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions and embodied carbon of our product in future. The issue with the electrification route is that the technology for firing bricks and roof tiles with electricity is currently at quite a low TRL, technology readiness level. So there's still a lot of work around the innovation, development and commercialization of electric firing technologies that would enable us to use them at the scale that we need to produce the volume of bricks and ceramic roof tiles that the construction sector demands. So there's a way to go on that for us, but there's another area as well that we're exploring, which would be the optimization of the materials that we use. So we currently do add a small percentage of additives, and we're talking about probably less than 2% of total ingredients that help reduce the firing temperature or the time spent in our kilns. So there's more work to do around the materials optimization there. There's a few routes to Wienerberger's decarbonisation strategy that will enable us to reduce the upfront and embodied carbon of our products for the benefit of our customers and society in general.
I feel like that's such a key thing we've been learning throughout this podcast series we've been doing on COP26. Like every single thing we've talked about has involved, like, you have this great intention or this great idea, and then there's like 6 billion questions you need to ask afterwards. Like, I want to make a sustainable building. Okay, what material are you using? How are you going to be making that material? You know, what is the power source for the heat that goes into the kiln? Like, there's all these different things that you don't necessarily think about on the offset. So you feel like you have this easy solution. But, you know, as you dig deeper, you can find out, you know, people are doing different things to kind of reduce carbon emissions levels. And it's not always as easy as it appears, but it sounds like it's still an exciting thing to ask about. So I guess with that in mind, is there anything else that can be done to kind of make bricks more sustainably other than what you guys are already doing in terms of tackling the kiln?
So they're definitely the actions that are going to deliver the most savings, because the firing process and the drying process within our production facilities are the most energy intensive aspects of our business at the moment. So tackling those is really where we're going to make the big wins. They're responsible for over 90% of Wienerberger's carbon footprint. So with that and the materials involved as well, that 90% is a good chunk to be tackling. But I think you touched on a really good point of how difficult it is to construct and design a sustainable building, because if you take a systematic approach, then there are so many elements and questions that you have to ask, let alone be the kind of whole life carbon impact of the building, how the materials that you use affect that. But then you've also got the social and health impacts of their building design as well. Like, what's the indoor air quality going to be like? Is it accessible for the users? Will it be fit for the future? Is it going to be able to adapt to a changing climate over time? And also something I've been thinking about related to the use of the lifespan or reference lifespan of 60 years of a building is actually the impact on provision of social care for members of society, which seems like really far out. But I was considering that if you are designing, say, domestic buildings for a lifespan of 60 years, which interventions like Part Z might sway the construction sector to do, then you might be designing buildings for that shorter lifespan, and that might have an impact on the number of times that a building can be sold and the value that is retained over that lifespan. So at the moment, lots of the older generation are relying on releasing of equity or the sale of buildings in order to fund social care costs. But if the value of a building degrades much faster than our current predominantly brick-built buildings, then actually we might need to rely on other mechanisms to fund social care in the future, which would not be a good impact to have if the government continues to underinvest in provision and the reliance fall on us householders to be able to fund those costs. So planning for that equitable transition alongside the net zero agenda is really, really important. And that's really come out more, I think, through COP26, the discussions that are taking place there, and particularly the Resilience Cities framework that's been released over the weekend will really help to include that social and equitable transition element of the net zero agenda. And it's probably worth saying as well that we've recorded our podcast ahead of the specific day on buildings and cities, so there might be new announcements just this week that will be relevant to this agenda.
That being said, though, there are some things that are, we know are always going to be kind of discussed and things that aren't going to change. And that idea of thinking about your building and evaluate your building based on a 60-year lifespan. I mean, part of the problem that we're facing now is how much the built environment is impacting just by the nature of construction. It is really bad for the environment in terms of carbon. We're always trying to mitigate that. But if in 60 years we have to go and rebuild a bunch of things or retrofit a bunch of things, we're just kind of furthering the problem. We're just pushing it down the line to deal with it in 60 years. It seems like to me, you want to have buildings that are good quality and last as long as possible so we don't have to do this retrofit or rebuilds again, at least anytime soon.
Yeah, ideally, I suppose you'd want to build a durable structure for a building that was adaptable internally in order to allow the space to be used in different ways, be it commercial or domestic, and the ability to move walls and adapt living spaces like a loft space if you're looking at the traditionally formatted house, to make it fit for the future, with the idea that you'd be able to repurpose a building with as minimal resources needed as possible. And that kind of approach to the reuse of buildings could really help the construction sector reduce its carbon impact and resource impact too.
Yeah, so I just want to get your thoughts then on, obviously, I started out the podcast talking about timber because I feel like everyone knows that if you can build with wood, it's great because, wood can actually hold carbon. It is hands down the most green friendly way to build, but it has its different advantages and disadvantages. So, I mean, how does brick compare to timber? How does it compare to other things?
Sure. So it's, I think, really important to think again about the the intended use of the building and its design life as well. So there's definitely a place where timber can be useful. For example, if it's locked away in buildings for a long period of time, the Victorian house that I'm in now has timber beams in it, and they've probably been there for almost 100 years. And that carbon is being stored effectively. It will probably last a few decades more before they'll need replacing. But in those kind of situations, great, timber can play a role, and it will store carbon, but we really need to be careful about the end of life use of that timber in order to make sure that things like carbon and methane are being treated appropriately. So it's really horses for courses in terms of building materials for different applications. If you're going to have a building with a really long lifespan, then I'd argue that it's okay to allow a higher upfront carbon so that you get the durability and the low maintenance aspects of that building. But in other areas where, for example, you might be building shorter lifespan buildings or the climate is different, then things like timber can play an important role too.
Yeah, so it strikes me like you can't just be like, this is the best building material, period. So what I just said earlier, guys, about timber being the greenest was all lies. You can't just say that. You have to take into account, again, all those different questions. It comes back down. It's never as simple as you want it to be. It's so frustrating for me because I would love to just give people one answer, be like, do this, and it'll be great.
Yeah, so would I. But in conversations about materials, I always ask first, like, how long the building is expected to last. And unfortunately, a lot of architects, when you speak to them, they often don't know how long the building is going to be up for, which makes their decision-making process really difficult as well, because if they're trying to optimize the materials that are in a building and they don't know how long it's going to last for, then maybe you would tend towards over specification so that the building is able to last longer than the client thinks it might do initially. So it's a tough decision-making process to be in without straightforward answers, unfortunately. But the best thing you can do is consider the lifespan of the building, how it might be used in the future, and designing that adaptability to minimize resource use over the long term. And that will have a positive impact on the whole life carbon impact of the building too.
Right. And it strikes me again, like we need to be consistently asking these questions. How long do we want our building to last? So a brick has a capacity to be recycled. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does. So the kind of generic scenarios that we use in our models at the moment is that 90% of brick construction waste would be recycled, usually downcycled as aggregate, but they're still preventing virgin material being used for things like infrastructure projects. So there is value in that, and only 10% of it would go to landfill. So there's a good amount of diversion from landfill in our construction waste, but there's obviously more we can do to improve that, and solutions around not just making bricks recyclable but easily reusable will be a strand of work for us in the future as well. So at the moment, the mortar is so good at adhesing bricks together that it can be quite difficult to remove. So it's quite often that downcycling, crushing for aggregate is the best use of that material because of the pressures on sites to clear an area. But if you do have the time and the resource, then you can split bricks down into individual units and reuse them. If you're going to do that, we recommend putting them through the durability test just to make sure that they're fit for reuse. But yeah, they can be reused as individual units, and that's what we like to see more of taking place in the future, because ultimately it will reduce the resource consumption of the UK.
So we should add that to the list of technology advances we need. We need to figure out better ways to get the kiln heated, and we need to figure out ways to recycle bricks easier and separate the mortar.
Yeah.
So bricks, when it comes to sustainability, they have a couple advantages. And it sounds like the main one that you've mentioned is the fact that they're long lasting. It's about building durably at that point.
Yeah, long lasting. So the durability in both the performance and the aesthetics, and then also the contribution that they'll make to a building's fabric efficiency. So shielding the internal environment from the external environment, and the contribution that makes to protecting the vulnerable from fuel poverty. Because if you are investing in a material with a good thermal mass for your walls and roofs, then you'll be reducing that operational energy demand to heat or cool a building, which ultimately reduces the pressure on vulnerable households to meet those demands when they're in those buildings. So I would argue that bricks would make a really good contribution to net zero building from that respect, that it would be acceptable to allow a slightly higher upfront carbon in order to reduce that operational carbon, but it doesn't give us any excuses for not acting on the embodied carbon. And we've covered some of those items today that Wienerberger is pursuing to reduce the embodied carbon of our products too.
So in summary, basically, we've got that bricks are really good as a material if you want to build sustainably, because they are long lasting and they are durable, and they can also help when it comes to the operational carbon use in a building, because it's going to help insulate, it'll help regulate temperatures, which is always a good plan to have. But one of the key factors is, if you really want to get and maximize the benefits of brick, you need to be thinking long term. We want buildings that are up for more than 100 years. We're not just thinking about 60, we're going bigger than that. But the downside is, it's hard to make them in a way that's super carbon friendly. Case in point, it takes a lot of energy to heat them up and to make them into drying process as well. So that's not good, and that needs to be fixed. And then as well, the other aspects that we're looking into, you guys were saying that you're looking at kind of doing this filler material that kind of means it's a little bit less brick in there. So it's a little bit less heat and a little bit less drying time. Was that correct?
Oh, yeah. So you've touched upon our dematerialization efforts as well. Yeah. So Wienerberger has also been pursuing reducing the amount of clay and sand that we'll use within a product, but still maintaining those performance benefits. So when we are producing bricks for market, they need to meet certain durability standards, be it compressive strength or water absorption, freeze flow resistance, things like that. So we've been successful so far in within our extruded bricks, reducing the amount of material that we use, but still maintaining those performance thresholds, which has been great in reducing the volume of clay that we use.
All right, so it sounds like, in conclusion, if you want to build sustainably, don't discount brick. Definitely consider it, but you've got some key questions you need to ask. You need to find out how it's made is number one. And then watch this space, because it sounds like there's some really cool developments as people are pushing for a more sustainable way to make bricks and therefore reduce the embodied carbon and therefore make them super great for building. So exciting stuff in the future, it sounds like.
Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining me on today's podcast and giving me my brick crash course. I enjoyed it a lot.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for listening. I hope you also enjoyed getting a little bit of Brick 101. If you want to learn more about Wienerberger UK, you can visit wienerberger.co.uk, and that's wienerberger.co.uk. And if you want to learn more about news in the built environment, or if you just want to check out our past episodes of the COP26 podcast series, be sure to subscribe to Place Northwest. It's the best way to ensure that you don't miss a single episode. And if you've enjoyed our COP26 podcast series, please let us know. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Google Podcasts. We love reading them, finding out the feedback, and figuring out ways we can do better. I'm Julia Hatmaker. Have a great day.